Welcome, everybody. We'll be starting in momentarily. Today's class is going to be on the Torah reading, a short synopsis on this week's Torah reading. Good Shabbos, good afternoon, and welcome and thank you for joining us today on Lunch Break with the Rabbi. Today we'll have a quick overview on this week's Torah reading. The reason why I say a quick overview, because this week's Torah reading covers numerous times, dates, and stories and facts that happened during the Jewish people's time in the life while they were in the desert. In fact, it goes through a great span of time as well of the Jewish people's journey in the desert. And it tells us begins first with the obligation of Aaron being told to kindle the menorah. And as discussed earlier in the week, Aaron, why does it begin with this story, with this mitzvah? Is because last week we finished with the leaders of the Jewish people bringing their dedication to the tabernacle. And Aaron was upset by the fact that the only tribe that was not represented by bringing sacrifices to dedicate the tabernacle was the tribe of Levi. And over here, God comes along and tells Aaron that actually your mitzvah is going to be greater than theirs. As their mitzvah was only temporarily at the time when they dedicated the tabernacle, only the leaders of the tribes at the time brought the dedication to the tabernacle. However, you, Aaron, you will be able to kindle the menorah, and the obligation of the high priest to kindle the menorah is something for eternity. And the concept of the kindling of the menorah, as the Torah tells us in this week's Torah reading, is lahalis ner tamid, that the candle of the menorah should be continuously lit. That it's not enough to light the candle and we have to continue lighting it. But once it's lit, it should be great on its own, that it should be able to illuminate another candle as well. Which teaches us an important lesson, that when we give something and when we help somebody, it's not enough that we should continuously have to give them, but we have to give them that they should be able to give on their own. Meaning that when we make somebody great and we give somebody the confidence, or we teach a lesson to whatever it may be, it's not that we have to give to them, that we should continuously have to share it with them, but they should be able to take what we've given them and share with others, as in lighting the menorahs. When we light a candle, that candle then has the ability to light another candle, and that candle has an ability to light another candle, and continuously as these candles go on, as we can continue. The same idea is also when a person gives something to someone, whether it's sharing, we talk about sharing light, sharing Torah, that if we know Aleph, we have to teach Aleph the obligation, and that's what Aaron was all about. He personified the concept of sharing, of peace, loving, and kindness. That was the personification of who Aaron was. The Torah then moves on to the next subject of this week's Torah reading, which is the dedication of the Levites. The Levites were singled out as they were counted differently also in the last week's Torah reading, as they were now singled out to be those to represent the Jewish people in the Holy Temple. And now Aaron actually dedicated and lifted every single one of those Levites as if a new child, dedicating them, uplifting them, and giving them a specific purpose for generations to come, now that they will now be the representatives of the Jewish people in the Holy Temple. The Torah now takes us to an episode, the second year of when the Paschal offering was brought, the second time. And as the Torah tells us, there was a certain group of Jewish people at the time who were not able to bring this Paschal offering because they were impure. And they came along to Moses. Why they were impure is a different story. According to some, it's the people of Elitzaph and Uziel, who they were the ones who took out the two brothers of Aaron's sons when they died. So therefore, at the moment, now they were impure. And they could not bring the Paschal offering. And they came to a complaint to Moses and said, Lama Nigara, why should we lose out? Over here, every Jew is bringing the Paschal offering and we can't do it. So God came along and said, you know what? You have a chance. You are now a month later after Passover. You will be able to bring the Paschal offering. And ever since then it was set that there was something called Pesach Sheni, a second Passover, for those who didn't have the opportunity to bring the Paschal offering the first time, have the opportunity to bring it again a month later. Now, the only condition is that either that they were impure or they were in a far place. Hasidic commentators explain and explore from this concept a very important lesson that we have, that we've mentioned many times. The concept of, as in Yiddish they say, "Sinishtakem verfallen," it's never too late. That we should know that in everything in Judaism, regardless of what happens in every way and everything, that we shouldn't think, oh, well, I'm too old, I can't do it anymore. The time passed, I can't do it anymore. On the contrary, Judaism tells us Pesach Sheni, there's always a second chance. Just because you haven't done it yesterday, it doesn't mean you can't do it today. And every single day you can perfect and do what your job is, which means to come close to God, to bring an offering, a korban. The word korban doesn't only mean sacrifice, comes from the word karov, to come close to God, that we always have an opportunity to come close to God. It's never too late. Even if you were impure, even if because you were far or distant, whatever the cause may be, a person may always remember, should always remember that they have the opportunity to come close to God. Which brings us to the next part of the Torah reading, which tells us about the journey of the Jewish people. The journey of the Jewish people as they traveled through the desert was a very unique one. They did not know where they were going to be, how long they were going to be at a specific spot or place. Whenever the cloud of glory began to lift itself up off the tabernacle, the front section of the Jewish people, that means the tribes that were resting in the front, they would move. With them, then the two families of the Levites would come and dismantle the ark, the tabernacle. Then the third family, which is the Kohath's family, would come and gather the vessels. And they would all travel together until the cloud of glory would stop. Then the two first families of the Levites would start building the tabernacle again. The Kohath's family who was behind them started putting the vessels inside. And so on as the Jewish families of the Jewish people and the tribes would travel together. The way they were camped, that was the way they traveled. Sometimes they would stay in a place for a day or two. Sometimes they were there for years. One place they stayed for 38 years. So every single place where they traveled had a different amount of time where they would be, dictated and decided by the cloud of glory, by God, where they should and how they should stay for that amount of time. But one of the unique things that they needed was that in order for them to travel, there was a signal that was given to them to let them know that they were traveling. What was that signal? That was the special trumpets that they had. Moses was told by God that he should make 2 trumpets. These trumpets were made out of silver, and they would blow them any time to tell the Jewish people that it's time to move, that they're going to travel. They would also use these trumpets on special occasions of holidays as well. But what's the deeper meaning behind a trumpet? And especially as we know, the Torah is not something which is just a history book of what happened back then, but it is also contemporary application for us in our time in life. And the trumpets over here, the simple interpretation that we can see seemingly from the trumpets is as follows. That when we look at the trumpets symbolized an awakening, a sound that came through like we sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. What is the sound of the shofar? What was the sound of the trumpets telling the Jewish people? It wasn't just an alarm to let them know, okay, we're moving on. But also the trumpets are there telling the Jewish people that they have to move on in life. Meaning, over here in our contemporary application, the trumpet is that when we see an episode, something happening around us, sounding an alarm, we shouldn't just sit idle and say, big deal, and alarm goes. It should be giving us an impetus that we should say, it's a time for us to embark in a journey. We need to keep on traveling in the desert. We need to keep on moving forward. We need to keep on finding our way and keep on progressing and hoping and heading towards the land of Israel. The trumpet today is the alarms that sound that give us the impetus to realize we can't stay stagnant. We have to be constantly moving, just like the Jewish people in their places. Sometimes the trumpet, we stay in a place for 2 days or a year, whatever it may be. But a Jew must continuously travel. In our service to God, we have to be known as we are traveling, as we're going to see at the end of the book of Numbers. It tells us about the different travels of the Jewish people. It calls it the 42 travels, not the 42 resting places, telling us that wherever a Jew is, even while they're resting, we're only gaining energy that we can be able to travel further. Even while we're resting, whatever it may be in our different pit stops, we have to know it is only there that we can travel further. And the trumpet is that what inspires us and reminds us of how we have to continuously travel and move on in our dedication and our connection with God. The Torah then continues to tell us about the story where the Jewish people continue not to travel, heading towards the land of Israel. Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law, then decides to depart from the Jewish people after converting to Judaism. He moves back to the land of Midian. The Torah this week, you will notice that if you look in a Chumash, by the 6th Torah reading, you'll notice something very unique that's in this week's Torah reading that is in no other Torah reading, which is an upside down nun. And that is in between the two brackets, the two verses. The first verse starting Vayihi ben Soa, the last verse, Alpha Yisrael, two verses there's a nun before it and a nun after it. It's like a bracket. The reason for this is simply because, according to one opinion as well, these two verses are considered as if its own independent Torah. Another reason is because before it and after it is two different subjects, and over here it's just something seemingly in the middle. Also, because right afterwards we're going to see as their complaint of the Jewish people to God. But there's another interesting thing is that why a nun out of all the letters? The nun is numeric value of 50. There are 50 verses before it and 50 verses after it where it's stuck in the middle. But even more so, the deeper meaning as well is that these two verses tell us about how the Jewish people travel. Vayihi ben Soa, we actually say these two verses when we open up the ark. And Moses says that when the ark travels, the enemies of the Jewish people dissipate before them. As we've discussed beforehand, the enemies of the Jewish people dissipate by the very fact that we are traveling with the ark. Then we have nothing to fear. And this is, of course, very reminding us of at any time and in every age, that as long as we, the Jewish people, carry the ark of God with us, as long as we're dedicated and we know that we're going in the ways of the Torah and the mitzvahs, we have nothing to fear from of any type of enemy that it may be. As the two types of enemies that Moshe enumerates, those that hate you inherently, that they just hate you because of what you have, out of jealousy, regardless. But when we have the Torah and we're committed to the Torah's precepts, then we have nothing to fear from. The Torah then continues now, continuing in the Torah reading, telling us about the incident that happened with the Jewish people because of their lust for not just they didn't like the menu, and therefore they decided to complain about the menu, asking God for other types of food. And as you recall, they mentioned different types of food. They said, we remember the fish, the cucumbers, the watermelons, the onions, the garlic. These were different types of food. According to some commentators, this was the food that the only flavor, as we know, the manna was able to taste any type of food that a person wanted. But the only type of food that did not taste like were these 6 things that were enumerated. Some say for that reason, in fact, pregnant women should not eat those type of foods. There's different customs based on these type of foods. But the concept of here is that the Jewish people were not satisfied with what they were getting, though that God was giving them this manna from heaven, and they had it right by their doorstep. It didn't satisfy them, and they wanted, and they complained how it works. And therefore they said, we want to have a better menu. Over here, Moses got upset at the Jewish people and tells them, listen here, I've taken you all this time, given you all these stuff. Am I your mother that has to keep on carrying you? And he complains to God and says, I cannot carry the task of the Jewish people all myself. And therefore, God tells him that he should take 70 different elders, and he would take from the prophecy of Moses and give it to these people. One of the unique things that we find, that just because these people became prophets, it did not diminish the greatness and the specialty and the uniqueness of prophecy that Moses had. Because something that is spiritual, a soul, is infinite. And though God was sharing it with others, it didn't diminish from what an individual has, which is an important lesson for us as well. We always think, you know what, if I'm going to help this person, then what am I going to have? And over here, God was teaching Moses something very important. 70 Jewish people got prophecy, but nothing changed in Moses. When we help another person, when we give something to somebody else, not only are we not losing, but we are actually gaining. When we share, especially something spiritual, and even more so something physical, we don't lose from it, but in fact, we gain from it, that we're able to spread that wealth and gift that God has given us. In fact, Joshua at the time was upset about what those people were saying, the prophets. And what did Moses say? Moses said, I'm not jealous. Let God make everybody prophets. I don't feel anything diminished whatsoever. Moses in his humility couldn't care if everybody was a prophet. He didn't look for honor and for glory. He didn't look to be the only prophet. The more he shares, the better he is. And as this, the Jewish people had so much going back to what they asked for. They asked for having meat, and that all this quail, and if you're ever familiar with the saying, until it came out of their nose, where does it come from? It is actually in this week's Torah reading that they had so much that it was coming out of their nose. The Torah then continues to tell us how many people died because of their types of cravings and their lust and disappreciation and lack of appreciation for God's gifts, and therefore many of them died at that time as well. It is interesting to note that some of the people that most of the big prime complainers at the time were not necessarily from the original Jewish people. They were from the Egyptians that moved along and came out of Egypt together with the Jews. And they, along the way, many of them died out because since they were complainers every step of the way, always looking for different things that they had. For example, in this case of the menu, the sin of the golden calf, and so on. The Torah concludes with a final thought and a final story about this week's Torah reading. In this week's Torah reading is an episode of Miriam and Aaron talking gossip against their brother Moses. What happened? Moses was married to Tzipporah. And before Mount Sinai, right before God gave the Torah to all the Jewish people, there was a commandment that 3 days before the Torah was given, all the Jewish people had to separate from their wives. As we know that there's a concept of purity and impurity, and because of that, they have to separate from their wives as not to become impure. Therefore, Moses, including, also had to separate from his wife. After the Torah was given, God told all the Jewish people to go back to their wives, but he told Moses, you stand here, you stay with me. Now, Moses was not told by God not to go back to his wife for whatever reason, because he had to stay pure all the time, because God would come to him at every single time. Aaron and Miriam were upset about that. How come Moses doesn't come back home? How come he doesn't return to his wife? And the Torah uses the terminology that they spoke about, the dark woman that Moses married. Now, why does it call the dark woman? Commentators say because she came from Midianites, as they were African, they were darker, but as well that she was a very beautiful woman. And just like everybody agrees to what color she was, also everybody agreed how beautiful she was. And therefore, they were upset for Moses, and they're saying, listen here, Moses is a prophet. So what? We're also prophets. God also spoke to us. We also remarried. We stayed married. Why doesn't Moses go back? God was very upset by the very fact that Miriam spoke gossip against Moshe. And because of that, she was struck with leprosy. Moses prayed on her behalf that she should be healed. And for 7 days, the Jewish people waited until Miriam was healed from her leprosy. And only then did she return to the Jewish people, and did the Jewish people continue to travel on. Over here, we find something very unique. Every single day every single day after the services, there's a special prayer we say. It's 6 remembrances. We remember that going out of Egypt, how Amalek tried to stop us. We remember the fact that God took us out of Egypt. We remember the laws that God has told us and so on, and the law of Shabbos. One of the remembrances is the episode that happened to Miriam. Why is this so important that we should say every day? And if we look at Miriam's stature, she wasn't a simple woman. She was a very great woman. She was one of the prophetess. She was the one that led the Jewish people in song after the crossing of the sea. She's the one that protected Moses. Why was she so reprimanded for this episode? And over here we see something very unique. That where God comes along to the Jewish people, and every single person is measured according to their deeds. And just because you may be a great person doesn't exempt you from doing something wrong. And when you did something wrong, you are taken to task, maybe even harsher than those simpler than yourself. Miriam was a great woman, but guess what? She didn't get off the hook because she gossiped. But even more so, why is it so important that we say this one of the remembrances to remind us that gossip in any case can affect and does hurt those that it's spoken about. As great as you may be, and as great as the person you may be talking about, and as novel as the idea may be that you're talking about. We always have to remember who we may hurt by the words we say and by the things we share. And today in a life full of social media, that every time with just a click of a button we share something, and you never know whose life you can be ruining because of something which may be even false. Over here, the Torah reminds us something that important, why it's part of the 6 remembrances every single day. That before you share information about somebody, regardless of who it is, maybe a great person, maybe not such a great person, think, is it appropriate? Should I or shouldn't I? What will I gain? Who will benefit? What is the purpose of it? And again, we will see that probably most things we share aren't probably worth sharing. Let us focus on Aaron. If you look, Miriam was the one that was punished. She was the one that spoke about it. Aaron was a person who looked to pursue peace. Even Moses, though he was the one that was gossiped about, he was the one that prayed for Miriam's recovery. He was the one that asked that the Jewish people wait until they travel until Miriam recovers. Moses was the epitome of a person of humility. When we have humility, we are not affected or offended. When we have humility, we see we can share and everybody can care. Moses is our teacher. Let us learn from the teachings of Moses. A, how we should share and not be afraid of losing because we only gain. B, of the importance that even if once somebody did offend us, we should pray for their recovery, pray for their healing, care for them, not look to try to have more animosity or to reciprocate. Reciprocate with kindness. Show them true love, and you will see the kindness come from them as well. May God bless us all with only giving us good things to say about people, only happy things to share with each other. Wishing you the very best for a wonderful Shabbos and great week ahead. Have a good Shabbos. See you Monday with Lunch Break with the Rabbi at 1 p.m. Thanks for tuning in.